Hello, this is Past Gavin speaking to the time travelers in the future. And I think that in the last video I had made the point that reading a book is not as good as talking to the author. And then I wanted to, keep going with that, is that talking to the author is not as good as recording your conversation with the author. And then recording your conversation with the author is not as good as doing multiple recordings with the author where you can go back and review and pick out timestamps and kind of narrow in on the more important points where there may be confusion. And so, I just wanted to try and take that idea further at the start of this. And, to take it one more step, you could go with version control as well. So you do review and you do version control of what is being updated, what is the knowledge that's being updated and how it got updated and when it got updated. So let's continue with Brent talking about synthesis, which is basically related to what I just talked about, how to do synthesis.
A parallel idea of consensus is like synthesis, and I think synthesis can be built collectively, but it can also be worked on individually and privately, and to a large extent it can be an individual exercise, right? And that's what I do, is I try to take in a lot of different sources, not necessarily like all the diversity of opinion, but like a narrower, kind of span of perspectives as opposed to beliefs or opinions, and then you kind of get a kind of view from space, or you kind of just can abstract and frame things differently, right? So
that's where I had mentioned in the last video where I got the sense that Brent didn't like the word belief. He chose alternative words like views, perspectives, or opinions. And I'm curious to know why. I get the sense that calling it a belief seems derogatory because it gets into kind of the religious territory and away from the objective science territory. So I think, he treats, so the sources that he gives his attention to, he's treating them as being better than, the sources that talk about beliefs. Even though I think the beliefs are kind of ingrained. When people do science, a lot of times there emerges some kind of a conclusion or an explanation, and it's not necessarily a conclusion or explanation that is able to make predictions. And so if it can't do that, then it's kind of in that territory of a belief. So I just wanted to kind of point that out.
there are people who do great synthesis, right? And transdisciplinary work, and blending politics and geopolitical analysis and culture and social theory.
So I wanted to point at Elliot Temple. He's got an article. I'll pull it up. Elliot Temple, overreaching. Well, it doesn't come up very quickly here. Maybe I can use Google. And inside of that article, he talks about general knowledge that you can learn, like problem solving and mathematics and philosophy. Look, is there some search history here? It's so interesting. It shows you some of my searches and even some of my wife's searches. dining tables were searched for. Let's see. Yeah, that's my other half. Yeah, Elliot Temple. Oop. Overreaching. There. So this was a good article. I just shared it in my Discord server. But you can talk about general purpose. And so besides a few areas you like and do lots of projects in, you should also have broad knowledge of some really general purpose that can be used in many fields. Examples of really generic stuff: philosophy, reason, problem solving, writing, reading, communication, discussion, arithmetic, algebra, logic, computer use, basic science, basic economics, basic political philosophy. These things are building blocks used in many other fields, so learning them doesn't invest in future projects of a specific type. And he has reasons to do that, but then my thought, which is related to what Brent is saying, is that the people who are best at general purpose, generic stuff, are masters of at least that one thing, that you like, right, and do lots of projects in. So your mastery of that one thing that you like and do a lot of projects in allow you to develop all of these other generic stuff. And so, like, the question would be, for example, what is Elliot Temple really good at? And maybe it's chess. And so so in order for like me to take someone seriously, they would, as like an expert or someone who's really good at this generic stuff, they would need to be, have some level of mastery. And the same thing for me, like, because I have not done a master work. And so when Brent's talking about all of these people that he gives his attention to, maybe all these writers in the critical race theory world, the question would be, is what are they a master of? Like, are they a master? Have they designed a cathedral, or have they designed a helicopter, right? There's these, are they the best chess player in the world? So I wanted to point that out. I think it's relevant. I want to just go back and look at what he just said one more time. So I'll pause this. All right. And let's listen to what he just said again.
There are people who do great synthesis, right? And, transdisciplinary work and, blending politics and geopolitical analysis and culture and social theory.
And so he thinks that there are people who are great at this. The question is like, does he know them? Like, I think he thinks he knows them and he's identified them. And my claim would be that a lot of those people are being ignored. This is a problem this is part of the education problem. I've called it the human resource problem. So how do we identify the people who are able to do this transdisciplinary analysis? And, what I'm thinking is it would be the people who have become a master of something. So all of those people that he's kind of upholding, and then which results in him excluding others. My thinking is that he's excluding people who are a master at something. And that's because he's actually put the wrong people in his hierarchy. And so, this is about education and the answers to the education problem. And so I'd mentioned, like, everyone can identify the problems. And I think that might be one of the best reasons to give attention to critical race theory, is that they have identified problems. Like, identifying problems is not hard, but identifying answers and doing problem solving is hard. Like a von Neumann, for example. We need to make sure we're not excluding von Neumann and the people who are masters at master of one, jack of all trades, master of one. we need to identify those people. And on kind of a related topic, that's what I talked to Jacob about last night, is this idea of how Twitter should be. Like ideally, on our social media, we would, there would be an opportunity for people to opt in to giving up their anonymity. So you're identified as a real person, and then you could have the opportunity for people to opt in to sharing their credentials. And maybe you share your IQ, which maybe isn't the best idea, but that is an idea. And you could share your accomplishments, like it's like a resume, but there could be tests that verify that you have an understanding of certain topics. Like if you go back to that generic stuff, like economics, for example, and then there can, because economics seems like, I think Elliot said that economics is one of those, and if he didn't, that was a mistake. Yeah, basic economics. So, yeah, I think you would need to know that, or you really can't be taken seriously. And then the argument alongside that is, you can't be taken seriously as a problem solver. You can be taken seriously as a human being who's worth your attention, who experiences problems and may need help. But as a problem solver, I think in general problem solvers we need to be looking for problem solvers. I don't think we are. And we could transform the way we behave on the internet so that it's easier to identify, the answers to problems, because we've made it easier to identify the information coming from those who have worked at being problem solvers, or who were gifted with this problem solving ability. So I think this would be a point. It would be interesting to have this conversation with Brent, but I think it would require the asynchronous back and forth method instead of a real time. Or at least if I was participating, I don't know if I would want to do the real time conversation about this topic. I would try, but I would then want to take it and do what I'm doing now, and then have him review some of my analysis of the previous conversation so that we could do another one, so that I could have time to digest the information. And that's one of the things about IQ, is that I think, like, if you have an IQ test that's based on like your ability to process information within an amount of time, I wouldn't score as well as some, but if you gave me enough time, I think I could develop the skill and solve the difficult problem. I just need a little more time. And another thought is, you could be a part of a community or a tribe where you have like an average IQ, like a problem-solving tribe. And so then the individual doesn't necessarily need to reveal their IQ to the world, but that individual could say, could join a tribe, and then their IQ is part of that average. So then people could see, the IQ increased or decreased, which I think might be better, like a better way of relating with people. Instead of like trying to point out the person who has the highest IQ, you can just have an idea of the general intelligence of the community.
And I think there's a lack of synthesis too in these spaces. There's a lot of mapping and pluralism, sort of throwing things together. And just, case in point, I talked to Joe Lightfoot yesterday about his liminal web piece, and we have a very constructive interaction. And then before that, I talked to Chris D, if you know who that is, and I pretty sure that I came across both Chris D and you first in the Noetic Nomads Discord. That kind of space is where I think some of us cross paths first.
Right.
And so I'm reaching out to people more than they're reaching out to me, but but that's, I for the past year and a half, I've kind of like not been so productive, right? I've still been doing things and consuming things, but now I'm back in production mode. It's about it's about like utilizing those networks, the networks that have been built, like whether it's the Stoa or Rebel Wisdom or whatever, and those. There's definitely other things that I'm very interested in, but I want to, and it's going to come down to me and what I can produce. But we've only got a few minutes left.
So I think I'm not sure it is all about him and what he can produce. I think it's about becoming the change you want to see, the Gandhi quote. So if Brent wants other people to give him more attention, maybe he wants people with more status to give him more attention. As someone has less status, then maybe he needs to practice giving attention to people with less status. Or if he maybe it also, like my sense is that he, instead of trying to create more content and trying to get attention, maybe he should be looking for the certain quality of people who are willing to play the game that he thinks is most important. And he may not think consensus building is most important, but that would be the one that I think is most important out of his ideas. So I don't think he has the answer to his problem.
Coming back to the Patreon thing, like in the past couple weeks, I've put out 4 patron-only videos. And that's the first time I've done that, because I've had this Patreon for 3 years, but I've never made anything behind the paywall, right? And I've never aggressively recruited. And so now, and it is like still very costly for me up front, but I've started producing patron-only content, which gives me a bit of a buffer to test things out with people and to keep it hidden. And I do have the intention to start making it public, but I want to invite, I want to like prove my track record through this content, start making things public. But the more people that come inside sooner, the easier it gets, right? So like I said, I'm at the 4th video I posted 2 days ago, and I spent a few hours today recording about Ukraine, about that situation. Obviously, lots of people are covering that, but I watched a ton of videos, and I'm just trying to give my kind of, first impression meta-analysis, because sometimes the details don't matter that much. Like, what did NATO do and blah, blah, blah. It's like, okay, that stuff matters, but not in terms of people's armchair political analysis. What matters is that, again, this comes back to implicit consensus. Look around the world right now. Pretty much everybody is against Putin and what's happening, right?
It goes back to implicit consensus. So let me pause this. So implicit consensus about the war in Ukraine. So I've been ignoring the war in Ukraine because there's a question of, why would that be a valuable use of my attention? So I want to note, it's like Brent's giving attention to it. He probably sees a lot of people giving their attention to it, and he wants some of that attention. He's like hungry for that attention. And so there's just kind of there's some type of a game going on, and a psychological game, has something to do with zombie hordes and vampires. Well, I noticed, at one point I heard about the war in Ukraine, and I said, well, let me go watch Russia Today, because, I'm aware of the problem of implicit consensus, bias, mob think, double think. That's why I'm interested in, like, I'm hoping that I'm demonstrating the right way of being. Um, where he just talked about how he put hours on the war of Ukraine. Well, I'm putting hours on, trying to learn in this Brent Cooper treatment plan. And so what happened was the banner in the Russia Today said something like Poland has banned Russia Today. And so I started noticing, multiple countries, multiple platforms banning Russia Today. And so this is why you can end up with implicit consensus, is because there is not you end up becoming someone who's within a bubble, within a network where you aren't actually able to easily connect with a different view, because there's an intolerance, and there is not an appreciation of diversity. And similarly, I imagine it's very similar in Russia. Like, they are in their own bubble with their own implicit consensus, and the information may be similarly. There's a propaganda and information filtering going on inside of Russia, and this is how the polarization happens. This is why the sense making does not happen, why the education does not happen. So I think he's susceptible, very susceptible to these, pathological, using his word, pathological ideas and thoughts. And it's related to this, idea of what is the orthodoxy, what is agreed upon implicitly, and like a lack of skepticism about that.
So you're seeing the mobilization of like mainstream media, like various state actors, and sanctioning Russia from all sides, right? Russia's not going to last through what they're doing. We're just coming up on a week.
Russia is not going to last. So I talked with Jacob about that as well. Like, ideally, when we do our activities on the internet, every prediction, you would end up counting the predictions for each individual and their percentage of success rates. And so that was a prediction, and it wasn't a very good prediction in that it wasn't specific. It's like, Russia is not going to last. Well, what does that mean? Does that mean there will be no more country named Russia? Does it mean that that's going to happen in the next year? Or does it mean that Russia will give up? And it doesn't tell you when will they give up. So it's the analysis is very superficial. And the way we can, if you were going to develop the best education system, the best problem-solving system, you would want to be able to identify the people who are able to consistently make accurate predictions. And so we have to be careful about our predictions.
Of invasion and bombardments. But anyways, that's just to say I've started to cover it today. I'd like to put something out there and actually make it public as soon as possible. Because it's part of the accelerated growth of this project, and it's part of making a difference on every single issue. And I never wanted to be a political pundit, but that's becoming a necessary part of what I have to do, to achieve my goals as a writer. I can't really depend on other people. I've been let down with a lot of those attempts. So, that's my pitch, to say, like, join for $1 and you'll get access to everything.
So he has goals as a writer. Like, that's an interesting goal. And, for me to pull it back into what I'd said earlier is, well, is he a master? Because I think the writings of the people who are a jack of all trades and a master of one are really important writings. if we want to solve problems, right? If we want to make predictions, then we need those people to be higher up in our cognition network. But at the same time, we don't want to ignore those who are, who are practicing trying to become a master. So the goal isn't very specific there, to be a writer. And so, if you were to go read some Elliot Temple, that article tells you all about, how to have success and avoid error correction. And you would need to have a path forward policy such that you can get help from others. So he's making, the biggest mistake is not having a path forward policy such that someone could provide the criticism to you. Because I would say all my experiments with giving unsolicited criticism have resulted in failure. And that's hundreds of failures. So, I don't, he's got a long ways to go to have a lot of success and to stop making so many mistakes. But it is interesting listening to the problems he's aware of, and that's due to him listening to a lot of people who are reporting on problems as well. And these aren't like babbling babies. Like when I talked to Jacob, I was saying we need to listen to everyone, and he's like, "No, you don't listen to the babbling baby." And I'd said, "Yeah, the pediatrician says you kind of ignore the self-report until the child reaches a certain age, but this is not a babbling baby. That would be condescending." And that's what I think Jacob makes that mistake, is he'll be too condescending, and that's what and I think he listens to a lot of people who are too condescending. Now, I know I'm being condescending as well. I'm saying Brent should not be I would say something like, I think I'm a better problem solver than Brent, right? And then try to be objective about that. I think I could be a better, and I'll leave it at that. But as far as someone who is experiencing problems, healthcare problems, for example, and reading about others who are experiencing problems and have an awareness of a lot of problems, he's worth listening to, and so is everyone. Everyone is worth listening to, including a babbling baby. I was at my friend's house, and I was at the house of a person who I treated like a friend, and him and his wife had just had a baby, and the baby was babbling and crying, couldn't walk, and they were in the other room, and so I went in there, and I saw that she didn't have her blanket on her, and I put the blanket on her, and she stopped crying, and I walked out, and the mother's like, kind of wide-eyed, like, "What did you do?" And who knows, as a mother, being protective, it's like, "What'd you do to my baby?" Or it could be, "What's the trick?" I don't know. But yeah, you can even listen to a babbling baby, and you can attempt to solve a problem to help the babbling baby, right? So Jacob Facciarecci's making mistakes as well, and he probably won't watch this video either, because he doesn't see me as someone who is a master at one, like, jack of all trades, master of one. Like, from what I can tell, I'm like one of the most coachable people, and so that's getting close to what I'm like gifted at as a master or a prodigy or something, which means I'm not like naturally just gonna pick something up and be the best, but if I put in the time and energy, I could be able to become a jack, and do pretty good. And I've developed, I'm moving toward being a master of design of complex systems, right? Which is, is there a test? like that would, it would be nice to have a test to certify people in being a master at analyzing a complex system and pointing out the problem in the smallest amount of time. That's a test where I actually would be better than most people if it was timed, right? I talked about timed tests. But anyways, that's the reason I don't think Jacob realizes that I am a master at anything. And the question for Jacob would be, what are you a master at? And so in his cognition network, I don't know how much he appreciates. I don't think he's very good at identifying masters and the people who deserve more attention. And I don't think he's very good at, and because of that, he will have, he may look down on people. So he will appreciate those who are in the orthodoxy. So if you're, and we talked about this last night. So he has a similar, he's doing a similar pattern, a similar kind of mistake that Brent does about having the bias and having the implicit consensus within the orthodoxy, even though he is aware. We talked about a story about the oven Eshnai, about, you know, the rabbis trying to decide. It's a Talmudic story about the rabbis trying to decide if this oven was would, I don't know all the language of Judaism, but is it essentially kosher? Like, it's probably the wrong word, but is it lawful to use this oven? And maybe the question is even more specific at this time on this day, but there was, you know, the person who was rejected ended up being right. And so, you know, I think Jacob is susceptible to the same kind of thing that Brent is with regard to being within a community and excluding the one who can help the community do sense making and learning. And that's why when I talk to him about, we need an internet where we can try to identify the experts. And when I talk about how, you know, Jordan Peterson, at one point I said, I imagine you really think Jordan Peterson's smart, and there was a point in time where he was being ignored, mostly ignored. I don't think he realizes that I might be one of those people, right, where I'm being ignored on things that, if I wasn't being ignored, that I would really be able to help more people. And I'm echoing what Brent says there. We have these feelings that, and I'm sure Jacob feels similarly, but I do think we should try to develop a means by which we can identify the experts. And the proper way of being is to say, well, so the thing that I think I'm best at, I'm confident there's someone better than me. And it would be best if we identified that person, right? So let's let Brent finish this thing up.
And then there's higher tiers you can contribute to, but there's no additional rewards at this point. I just want numbers of people, and that's why I set the bar low at $1. And so, you know, I'm passionate about pitching like this, but I'll burn myself out really quickly if I'm just doing sales calls every day, right? So I also want to, like, you know, convince one person, and then they go convince one person, and then they go convince one person, right?
And that's the way it works. And then the question is, how do you convince a person? So this is me trying to convince, for example, Brent and Jacob, and you, future time traveler who is hanging out with past Gavin, who is different than the Gavin that's in your time. So I need to go be a dad, and I'll pick this up tomorrow. I've been doing this each morning. I need to be a dad and go to work and do these other things that are important. So if all goes well, there'll be another one for your pleasure.